Henry Allen Venture, the Hankinator, Russian Guyovich himself. Hank is an extremely beloved character on a show made up almost exclusively of beloved characters, ones who go through so much, who grow and change from season to season, while still remaining who they are at their core. I want to take a look at Hank from his humble beginnings as a simple boy adventurer to the young journeyman at the center of the finale film. Let's do this. I'm going to be honest, internet, this was originally going to be a video about how the Venture Brothers as a show handles character growth as a whole, but with its huge cast of major and supporting characters, it became obvious to me that focusing on a single character would be the best way to do so in a way that didn't feel unruly. That said, if you want me to cover other characters from the series, I am more than willing to. So, if we look at Hank in the pilot episode, The Terrible Secret of Turtle Bay, he isn't much of a character, really. He and Dean function together, with little difference between their personalities. They are mainly used to represent the boy adventurer archetype, being kidnapped and having to find their way out of it, but made into a deconstruction by the fact that they are teenagers instead of an 11-year-old like Johnny Quest, the main show that they're parodying. The pilot also has them refer to Hank as the dumber of the two, but that isn't really explored until the series as a whole. The boys are just a naive double act. And while yes, Hank is less book smart than Dean, he's also the more grounded in reality of the two, in a weird way, while Dean retains the more childlike naivety of the pilot versions of the boys. This makes Dean more of the quintessential victim of the two, while Hank wants to be more of an action man like their bodyguard Brock, leading to him, for better or worse, being the more decisive of the brothers. The admiration of Brock is highlighted in episodes like Home Insecurity, where he tries to join Brock on his Memorial Day weekend excursion, as well as hanging out in Brock's room, checking out his tapes and asking him questions in Eeny Meeny Miny Magic, and it's all really cute. My personal favorite example from these early episodes is from Ghost of the Sargasso, I think that's how it's pronounced, where he is super excited when Brock asks him to act as his hands.
All right. You have to be my hands. Talk you through it.
Brock,
What?
this could be the single greatest moment of my life.
This is my favorite not only because this is a funny gag on its own, but because he really does succeed in following the instructions in taking out enemy pirates. This admiration of Brock has led Hank to wanting to rush into battle, something he ends up succeeding at in the second part of Showdown at Cremation Creek, where he poses as a Russian exchange henchman. But this bond that they have is one of the major influences on Hank's first major change as a character, but there are a few other factors we should cover first. The main one being when he meets Dermot in the buddy system from season 3. Their friendship sparks from the combination of Dermot being a chronic liar, pairing perfectly with Hank being gullible. Hank is always a brother, most likely to butt heads with their dad, and Dermot's anti-authority, confrontational attitude definitely rubs off on Hank throughout the series. This is also Hank's first real friend outside of the compound residence, one that he makes on his own, despite everybody in his life hating Dermot. It really highlights how, in a world where so much of his life is being controlled by the adults around him, Hank is still going to push to make his own choices. One of the things that has to be discussed in the early seasons of Hank's growth is the Venture clones. The boys first discover the clone slug's existence in season 2's Viva Los Muertos, and set them loose on the battlefield a season later in The Family That Slays Together, Stays Together, Part 2. It is something that really affects Dean throughout the later seasons, a trauma that keeps coming up for him, but not for Hank. With Hank, it doesn't faze him in any negative way, with him even confronting Dean about it. Hank thinks it is cool and says that's what it means to be a Venture.
You're not upset?
About what? That I'm like some kind of super cool, probably magic Highlander cyborg clone? And no. Hey, just one more reason it's great to be a Venture.
A statement that is doubled down on in the reveal at the end of the film. And this highlights Hank's overall positive worldview that is very rare in a show like this that can get so nihilistic.
Been driving to my parents' house for 10 years. You promised.
Eddie, being out of your box isn't a right. It's a privilege.
Now, the biggest moment of growth for Hank comes at the end of season 3, where Brock quits the OSI and is seemingly killed off. This pushes Hank into the much more overtly rebellious version of himself. from growing out his hair, to wearing Brock's jacket, the last connection to his old hero he has, and that's when he really develops his sass mouth attitude. His attitude isn't helped by the friction growing between him and the rest of his family caused by his dad. Rusty really starts to shift even more of his parenting to focus on Dean, who's always been the clear favorite. Because of that, he's not just mad at Rusty for doing that, or at Sergeant Hatred, the authority figure taking Brock's place, but at Dean because Hank is resentful of his brother being favored. Hank doesn't get his own lab, but Dean does. Hank just gets told to find a job. I will say I do think of Season 4 as this important defining point for the series as a whole. It really is a turning point, especially for the characters. Up until this point, the show has had a status quo. Doc Venture, Brock, and the boys going on adventures, as well as downtime between adventures in episodes like The Yard Sale, all working as great parodies of the boy adventure show genre, while constantly expanding the cast of supporting players. And while extremely dark at times, it is essentially doing to old adventure cartoons what The Simpsons did to family sitcoms, just with the early 2000s Adult Swim edge all over it. Season 4 is where they really shake up the status quo, and for more than one episode. For example, Powerless in the Face of Death. The first episode of Season 2 covers what happens when the boys died at the end of Season 1, but that all leads to the clone reveal. It's deconstruction, not change. You get your first real shift when they change the guild-assigned arch-rival from the Monarch to Hatred in the third season. It really feels like the first time the show was willing to make a real change, not just for an episode, and sets in motion longer-form storytelling that we end up getting. That said, it is still keeping the format of adventurer and villain, and the Monarch, it's not like they removed him, he's still around, it just changed the dynamic. Season 4 replaces Brock, even after they reintroduce him to the show. He's not their bodyguard again until they move to New York. In changing the dynamic of the core 4 characters, they fundamentally change the mechanics of how stories will play out. Hatred handles situations much differently than Brock, and with the more rebellious Hank, there is no longer a willingness to follow orders. Hank also feels a lot less gung-ho about adventuring in general. While in the early seasons he seemed more enthusiastic about it, in particular working with Brock to get them out of trouble, that is not the case here. That said, he doesn't lose his enthusiasm, it just shifts. He's more excited about doing things like becoming the new Wonder Boy, reminding us of his naivety, or when he opens Hank Co., as well as becomes a detective in the 12th episode of the season. We will do a whole section on his persona soon, don't worry. From here we get a pretty solid shakeup to the main characters and the show as a whole almost every season, and it is part of why I think the show works as well as it does. The Venture Brothers can keep the show fresh, making changes to the core cast while never losing track of who they are and the charm they had from the early seasons. Hank takes a bit of a back seat in the 5th season, where the focus of the brothers' growth is more on Dean and all of his existential crises. Let me know if I should do a video on him. That said, we get a real interesting look at Hank's growth when he spends a run of episodes wearing the Sphinx power suit that once belonged to the Countess. He starts wearing the suit because it gives him a ton of strength, and he's not being bothered by the fact that it gives him a very feminine figure while wearing it. Something that kind of sticks with him, because in Mama's Boys, the episode after he loses it, Hank says,
You don't put your heteronormative, gender-biased hang-ups on me, man. Boys can play dress-up too.
Something that early seasons Hank never would have said because he was deep in his childhood admiration of Brock and had a very specific view of what masculinity was. So it is really cool to see that growth manifest not only in big ways, but in smaller moments that could otherwise be viewed as one-off lines. Like it is a one-off line, but it is also a symbol of growth. Now, while I said Season 5 is more of a Dean season, we do have one episode that really stands out for Hank, and that is Venture Libre. In this episode, Hank and Hatred go with Doc to Central America to deal with Venturestein, who has gotten loose. The episode has Hank getting hyper-caffeinated and taking on his Batman persona, the Bat, and successfully saving the adults. This both shows how capable Hank has become over the years, but also highlights his alter egos being able to do things that Hank doesn't feel he can do on his own. We first see the Bat as just an extension of his love of Batman when he's dressed like him jumping off the roof and dying in a montage of Venture clone deaths. The costume comes up a lot, both when costumes are and aren't appropriate, as a representation of him still being a child. That said, in the episode Love Bites from Season 2, Hank is in the costume when he rescues Dean from becoming Baron Underbite's bride, laying the groundwork for it becoming his action persona in Venture Libre. Just quickly wanted to say, if you're enjoying the video, please like and subscribe because it helps the channel out. And if you have the means and are feeling a little extra generous, you could even become a channel member for just a few dollars a month. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. So that's the basis of the Bat character, but that is not the only Hank alter ego. We get Russian Guyovich that I mentioned earlier, and the confident detective from Everybody Comes to Hanks, and the other major one being Enrico Matassa. Enrico first appears in the Mama's Boy episode as the villain persona Hank takes on so he, Dermot, Helper, and 21 can get into the insane asylum to look for Teddy, and I am not going to dive too deep into that episode because it is a whole thing on its own. The Enrico persona in that episode is a series of jokes on the word Hank, as well as being a suave ladies' man filtered through Hank's view of the world. In season 7, they bring back Enrico, where Hank uses the character as a disguise to break into Wide Whale's house to see Serena, and the choice to do it with this specific persona says a lot. Partially because Wide Whale is a villain and blending in as his villainous character makes sense, but also because he is committing a crime and breaking in, and again, criminal. On top of that, as mentioned, Enrico Matassa is Hank's version of a ladies' man, and he is trying to visit his girlfriend. These alter egos aren't just thrown out randomly. Hank brings up his alter egos to Dean in the 3rd episode of season 7, saying he feels like something comes over him, questioning if he's like James McAvoy in Split. Dean responds by saying,
"Yeah, I don't think it's dissociative identity disorder. Definitely have ADD though."
Reminding us how Hank is viewed by the family. The season 7 cliffhanger is Hank running away from home, slipping into the busy New York City streets as the Bat, and the follow-up movie builds off of the alter egos more than the series ever did. On his personal journey, Hank is being advised by the alter egos to search for his mother, hoping that finding her will fill the void made by Dean's betrayal. While it could be seen as a result of his head injury, it feels more like the next step, as he mentions the feeling of them taking charge in the prior seasons, like I said. This all comes to a head when they try to trap him in purgatory, proving that, at least in his mind, they were their own entities and not just Hank's overactive imagination.
Okay, so I actually just rewatched the movie and I gotten that detail wrong. The personalities are actually trying to keep Dean there when Dean goes into Hank's mind, so it's more of a reflection of Hank forgiving Dean for his betrayal, despite the fact that a part of him doesn't want to. But still, I think that it is still a really interesting look at his mind and how he compartmentalizes his feelings.
Alright, Internet, we've been over Hank's growth as a character, the evolution of his alter egos, and now we need to talk about the biggest part of his arc in the New York seasons, his relationship with Serena. Serena is his first real relationship, with Hank taking her out on their first real date in season 6's It Happening One Night, after he first saw her at the beginning of the season and actually meeting her in episode 3. Their relationship lasts through both the 6th and 7th season, tracking their ups and downs. He struggles to deal with the distance between them when she is taking classes at college, which sadly becomes understandable when you find out that she is cheating on him with Dean. That is what drives him to run away from the family at the end of the series, and while that may not be the most mature thing to do after a breakup, dating Serena is still the most mature romance he has had in the show. The first time they really cover Hank having feelings for someone in the series, and not just being attracted to them, is a crush on Molotov in season 3. Despite him talking a big game when he goes on that double date with Dean and Triana, this is a very juvenile crush. Aside from the fact that it is him having a crush on the woman Brock loves, it is also the equivalent of falling in love with your babysitter. He may not have viewed it that way, but there's no way that would have gone anywhere, obviously. What does go somewhere is his feelings for Dermot's older sister Nikki. While we are only introduced to her in Everybody Comes to Hanks, it is clear that he has had a crush on her for a while. Thanks to the confidence unlocked by his detective character, Hank and Nikki do hook up, though it isn't something he will remember since it gets wiped from his memory after finding out her past with his dad. In these 3 relationships, we see the progression of Hank really clearly. First, he has a very juvenile crush, to something a little less juvenile and an attempt at something more mature, although it still has shades of child, being that it is his friend's older sister. And then finally, a real relationship that he doesn't always handle in the most mature way, because in the end, Hank is still Hank. And Hank is someone who wants to pretend to stop robbers by doing a Michael Jackson dance. I will say, it's pretty interesting to me that Nikki is into Hank, with her saying that he reminds her of the version of his dad from the cartoon based on his life, because the doc does admit to thinking he and Hank are alike in the prior episode. And it's kind of sad too, because that is never a conversation that Hank and Doc ever have. It could have been a real bonding moment for them, connecting over their similarities, but in the 7th season, Hank still feels unloved by his dad.
Well, hello there, son. How was your day? Honestly, it started good, but it's turned out to be kind of a bummer. Well, that doesn't sound very Hank of you. Yeah, well, it ain't easy maintaining my famous can-do attitude when you're always all can't-don't to me. I don't get it. I mean, Dean cuts and runs on Team Venture, you give him whatever he wants. But I stick around and you punish me for it. I mean, I know he's your favorite, but you have to act like it?
God, I love Hank. He is a character who, despite struggling to find his place in the world, more often than not, is able to see the bright side. He is also the king of one-liners, so if you made it this far, leave your favorite line of his in the comments. That said, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a good one.